I'll briefly break down the fight stylistically for both fighters, and then give my pick. So, just first covering Dustin Poirier, he is a very young, cerebral, skilled fighter. He's got very aggressive, pushing forward Muay Thai stand-up, and I'll say solid if unspectacular grappling with a purple belt in BJJ, which he has back-to-back submissions of Pablo Garza, and most recently submitted Max Holloway with a mounted triangle armbar combination. What I will say is he has had the stylistic advantage in every fight whereby his opponents have been one-dimensional, with the exception of Danny Castillo, who was the bigger fighter at 155 and is the only loss that Dustin Poirier has on his record. And that was back in the WEC days, which Poirier certainly, as a fighter in his early 20s, has grown from. But Poirier has fought guys, Josh Grisby as a pretty much pure grappler with raw stand-up, guys like Max Holloway and Jung, who have good stand-up but don't have the grappling credentials to hang with most well-rounded MMA fighters. And Pablo Garza, who I would define as an opportunistic fighter who can throw a flying knee or flying triangle on Yves Bois, but by no means is a skilled striker nor a skilled grappler, as Dennis Bermida showed last weekend. So Poirier has looked like a stud, and he's been very tactical in his approach to fighting. So anytime that he's feeling counter pressure from his opponents, or he's clipped, he will immediately take the fight to the ground where he has a stylistic advantage, with the exception of the Grisby fight where he kept the fight standing and basically sprawled and brawled the whole time, except for the last minute or two, which I'll touch on later, where he basically was a fish out of water with no ability to scramble and just fending off submissions by Grisby towards the end of the fight. So Dustin Poirier does have a pretty complete MMA game, but he has, I believe, 3 flaws which may be able to be exploited by the Korean Zombie in the fight next Tuesday. So first and foremost, the style of Poirier is such that he pushes forwards with his Muay Thai and leaves himself vulnerable to counter hooks. So we've seen Jung in the first 30 seconds of their fight catch him with a counter right hook, and Zach Mickelwright, even though he was starched within 1 minute of the fight in the WEC, he did counter with a large hook that connected with Poirier and stopped Poirier from pounding him briefly to gain about his wits before continuing to TKO him while he was standing. So Poirier does seem vulnerable to counters with his aggressive style. He also is vulnerable to his lead leg getting chopped down. So in the second round of the Jung fight, the stand-up was certainly won by Jung, and it was basically just working on that lead leg, decreasing the mobility of Poirier, and to the point where Poirier got a takedown with about a minute left in the fight, in the round, and 2 of the 3 judges, unsurprisingly with the unified rules of MMA, gave Poirier the round for being the guy on top at the end of the round, when in fact Jung had outstruck him for the first 4 minutes of the round or so. So Poirier's work rate on the feet has been shown to decrease as the rounds continue, and his third flaw, aside from being prone to counter hooks and his lead leg being prone to getting worked on and limiting his mobility, is the fact that he has a limited gas tank. Poirier was basically grinded out by Danny Castillo. He severely gassed in the Grisby fight and was able to be taken down by the end of the fight, even though Grisby was a punching bag for 15 minutes. And in the Jung fight, he admittedly gassed, was strictly clinching and grappling in the third round, and he openly said, and the audio caught it on the broadcast, congratulations on your cardio. Sorry I had to stall out the fight. Openly acknowledging that his cardio is a disadvantage as the fight goes deeper. So, I feel that the sports books capped this fight as a 3-round fight initially, and it was capped at approximately 3-1, and it has bounced around a little bit, but it's roughly in that range. I suspect this because the details were very murky early on about the UFC on Fuel as being a 3 or 5 rounder for their fights going forwards, and I believe the props were initially released as fight goes the distance or fight is inside of 3 rounds, and that prop was removed and then now replaced with a 5-round prop. So, and there's been confirmation by both camps that it's 5 rounds. So I feel that the prices were initially set for Poirier versus the Korean Zombie at 3 rounds, and approximately 2.5 to 1 or 3 to 1 bet on Poirier might be justifiable if it was a 3-round fight, because Poirier is unbelievable in the first round in almost every fight, and in the second round he has a high enough work rate and is savvy enough to typically win that round as well. He won it on 2 judges' scorecards even when he gassed against Jung. But his work rate really drops off, and it's been a tale of 2 fighters as the fight continues on. So when we're getting into a fight that's 5 rounds, that's a big red flag for a guy, especially a 3-1 favorite. And a guy like Korean Zombie is a guy who's shown a gas tank in wars. His first fight with Leonard Garcia was obviously one of the most epic wars fight of the year in 2010, and pretty unbelievable, but it was actually the Chan-Sung Jung that was the more fresher fighter at the end of the fight versus Leonard Garcia, who trains at 7,200 feet of elevation in Albuquerque and typically has cardio for days. So Chan-Sung Jung has never shown a weak gas tank in Sengoku, WEC, or UFC, and that will be a significant advantage, in my opinion, if the fight goes deeper. That is first and foremost, that if Dustin Poirier cannot finish the fight early, the fight stylistically favors the Korean Zombie. With regards to their stylistic matchups and finishing, I feel that Dustin Poirier is not a one-punch knockout kind of fighter. He throws punches in bunches. He throws basically damage to the point that it accumulates and opponents are KO'd, like Mikko Wright, or basically just fighting for their lives like Grisby was, particularly at the end of round 2, who was almost stopped by Steve Mazzagatti. So that is there's a clash of styles here where Korean Zombie's only been KO'd once. It was a flash KO by a very vicious head kick by George Roop in the second round. And he's never really shown that Chan-Sung Jung is vulnerable to accumulation of damage, even though he took a ton of damage in the first fight with Leonard Garcia and was a lot less hittable in the second fight. So that point does touch up on my next stylistic advantage for the Korean Zombie, which is that he's really undergone a metamorphosis, which I think is either underappreciated or it's not recognized by at least a portion of the community. I know there are sharps out there that recognize it, but Korean Zombie is not the same fighter as he was with Roop. With Roop, he was walking forwards, he was initiating the striking first and getting countered and picked apart, and Roop clearly won that first round in striking and KO'd him in the second round. After that, he openly had comments which stated that he would no longer fight as a Korean Zombie, and he would be more cerebral because he wants to have longevity in MMA, and he'd rather win and fight strategically than try to gain fans. And interestingly enough, he hasn't lost his fans because he still has been exciting in his past 2 fights, the Leonard Garcia rematch and then KOing Hominick in 7 seconds. But Korean Zombie now has a different stylistic approach, and I have not heard this talked about by other cappers or the media, but a very interesting point is that I feel Korean Zombie is a more effective fighter when he's actually moving backwards and countering than when he's moving forwards and initiating striking. As I mentioned, the Roop fight, he got picked apart and eventually KO'd. Whereas if you watch the Garcia rematch, he's actually moving backwards, and he more clearly outlanded Leonard Garcia in the first round than in the previous fight, although I clearly thought that Chan-Sung Jung won the first fight as well. And he also parried a punch of Hominik's initial combo at the beginning of their UFC 140 fight, and then countered with a massive hook that dropped Hominik, followed by vicious ground and pound of a few punches that were enough to call a stoppage. And I feel that Korean Zombie has a very tactical counter-striking game, which is overlooked, and understandably so by a lot of people, because there simply isn't a lot of footage on him. But if you watch enough of the footage since the Roop fight, you realize that he is not the same fighter as he was before, and that plays perfectly into Dustin Poirier in favor of Korean Zombie, in that Poirier will move forwards continuously, and he's vulnerable to counters, which is exactly right up the sleeve of Korean Zombie, and could put Dustin Poirier into problems, either catching him and dropping him, or stunning him and forcing him to shoot. Now, in the past, Dustin Poirier has been very strategic in terms of shooting when he's been in trouble, and he's been putting guys like Max Holloway and Pablo Garza on their back, and that's not an issue. Chan-Sung Jung is a different beast altogether, and people need to recognize how well-rounded his game is. I'm not suggesting that he's a talent that's well-rounded on the level of, say, Jose Aldo. Let's not get crazy here. But he is one of the most well-rounded featherweights in the UFC. He has very good takedown defense. Leonard Garcia shot multiple times to change the pace of the initial fight, and it was stuffed every single time by Chan-Sung Jung. And he even obtained takedowns of his own, both in the first fight and in the rematch. He also has vicious ground and pound. He threw massive elbows in the final minute of the second round and postured up with straight punches. That was unquestionably hurting Leonard Garcia, and then eventually sunk in the twister, and was, everybody knows, whatever, first twister ever in the UFC, submission of the year last year, which touches on the grappling exchange. Now, Korean Zombie is a blue belt versus Poirier, who is a purple belt. However, as much as typically you're able to compare the classification and hierarchy of the BJJ belting system with gi, I feel that this is a misleading matchup in that sense, as I feel that the Korean Zombie is a sponge in terms of learning. He's much like John Jones with his striking. Korean Zombie admitted after the rematch with Leonard Garcia that he won with Twister that he actually learned that maneuver watching YouTube videos of Eddie Bravo. And I feel that Korean Zombie has learned a considerable amount of MMA from either the Korean Top Team or his online whatever videos, or from Team Alpha Male, that he is a more well-rounded fighter than the initial footage suggests. I mean, we've only seen almost 2 rounds in one fight and 7 seconds in another fight since the Root loss, and if anything, sort of the unwritten non-visualized improvements that we see in young fighters are probably more buried within Korean Zombie than within Dustin Poirier, as we've seen Dustin Poirier in several fights recently, and by all means is he an improving fighter, but we've seen, the proof is in the pudding. We've seen how what sort of improvements he's made in his camp in terms of improving his transitions from striking to grappling, and very smooth submission attempts. But I mean, Max Holloway, with all due respect, as good as a striker is, he's as bad of a grappler and was easily submitted. So that's not going to fly against the Korean Zombie, and that is why I think that the play to make at UFC on Fuel 3 is the Korean Zombie